Welcome to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Revelation. Today we'll dig into chapter 13, which includes three primary characters. First, the dragon. We met him, which is Satan, back in chapter 12 last week. Second, we'll see the AntiChrist appear, which will be called the beast. And then lastly, we'll see a second beast, which is also called the false prophet. He's the global spiritual leader working for the Antichrist. And he's the promoter of Satan as well as the Antichrist. Let's begin chapter 13, verse 1. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. So Satan is on the shore summoning this creature from the sea. The sea is often a reference to the nations of the world, more specifically the Gentile nations. So he's coming from the population of earth. This beast also has the same 10 horns as we saw back in Daniel 7:7. In Scripture, horns indicate power and authority. And those crowns likely represent a confederation of 10 major nations, all ruled by this Antichrist leader, which again is likely the same nations that we saw in the book of Daniel chapter 2. Remember those 10 toes at the base of the statue. Also notice written on each of these crowns is this name, this blasphemous name. Again, likely meaning that these countries and, of course, the Antichrist himself are hostile to God, that they have this allegiance with Satan, and they're committed to persecution of God and God's people. So next we'll get more detail on the description of this beast and how closely it parallels the book of Daniel. Let's take a look at verse 2. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon, Satan, gave the beast 3 things: power and his throne, and a great authority. So as we shall see, this beast has tremendous power on earth, and this swiftness and ferocity, all which is sourced by Satan himself. The Antichrist, of course, will not look like this creature. This creature symbolizes what God sees in the heart and actions of this person. In real life, he'll appear very attractive and charismatic to the world. Again, Christ sees our inside. He sees our true heart and our true motivation. And that's what John is seeing in this vision of this creature. Let's look at verse 3. He'll continue to describe the Antichrist. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound. We'll see later this is a, quote, battle wound. But the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. We'll discuss this mortal wound, this, quote, fatal wound, a bit later, because it's mentioned several times in the book, chapter 13, and its miraculous recovery. Satan will make a big deal of this wound, but overall he's attempting to position this Antichrist to the world as someone that has these great powers, even the power to conquer death, and that he's invincible and attractive, and this powerful leader is leading these nations, and he's unstoppable is the position that Satan wishes people to be fooled about. Let's take a look at verse 4. People worshipped the dragon, Satan. Why? Because he had given the authority. They understood he had given the authority to the beast. And they also worshipped the beast, the Antichrist, and asked, who is like this beast? He's invincible. He's greater than God, they're saying. Who can wage war against it? So in the last days, people will be fooled by this charismatic leader that first appears as a person of peace, but then he'll change in that last 42 months. And they'll see the backer, Satan, as this great solution to all their problems. And as a result, there'll be a rejection of God. Let's look at 2 Thessalonians for that warning. In the last days, the people will have strong delusions that they should believe the lie. The next verse will tell us that this Antichrist was a talker, full of pride, full of solutions, full of himself, but most of all, full of contempt for God and God's followers. Let's look at verse 5. The beast was given a mouth by Satan to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. That was its, quote, reign. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander, meaning to lie, about his name and his dwelling place, heaven, and those who lived in heaven, which he's speaking about now, the church, which has already been raptured. In 7 it says, it was given, the Antichrist was given power to wage war against whom? God's holy people, and to overpower them, to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. This Antichrist will have major control of the entire earth. As we shall see, he'll start out somewhat as a peacemaker, but as he gains more and more power and followers, his hate and persecution of God and God's people only increases, gets more intense. But God keeps him on that short leash of 3.5 years, 42 months. So what we'll see is a character like Hitler. People will be fooled in the beginning and freely give him tremendous authority over these countries. But as he takes that power base, he'll begin to use that power base to control and now begin to force people via war to give him total worship and allegiance. Let's look at verse 8. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, meaning everyone will either voluntarily or be forced to worship the Antichrist, except a small group. And that's what it's speaking about here. All whose name have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, meaning those that have will not worship him. And that means those that have been saved. How have they been saved? By the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. And then it closes, whoever has ears, let them hear, meaning let them be warned. So the good news here is that there will be many that resist the demands of the Antichrist. And they will endure. They will remain faithful during this period. But God is warning them that these will be difficult times during this 42 months. Also recall, as we discussed several times previously, we're not speaking about God's church. God's church has already been raptured to heaven. These are those folks that remained on earth, left behind. They were the non-believers that have been converted during the tribulation period by those 144 evangelists, and also remember those two messengers in Jerusalem. So there will be a substantial harvest of people during this time that turn to God. And they're the ones that will go primarily get the brunt of the Antichrist's hatred. Let's look at verse 10. Christ tells them, these converts, if anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people during this period. So again, God is warning these many new converts that many will be imprisoned and some will be murdered during this 42 months. But he's reminding them their names are written in the book of life, meaning they've been saved. Their destiny is heaven. Now the chapter will begin to introduce this second beast, beginning in verse 11. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. Notice the appearance of this beast. From the outside, he looks like a meek lamb. But as we shall see, this is a disguise. From his speech, and more importantly, his actions, he is purely satanic. Christ has warned us about such folks. Let's look at Matthew 7:15. Beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. So indeed, this is the false prophet, this satanic global preacher. He comes from the earth, which many believe means he comes from the pit, the abyss of chapter 11. And he'll serve as this spiritual leader and cheerleader for both Satan and the Antichrist. He'll also be the enforcer. He's the arm, and the Antichrist is the charm, as we'll see in the next several verses. Let's look at verse 12. It, the second beast, exercised all the authority of the first beast, the Antichrist, on its behalf, meaning that this second beast is subordinate to the Antichrist, and he enforced the earth and its inhabitants to worship the first beast, the Antichrist, whose fatal wound had been healed. So Satan will use both these beasts to do his dirty work, which his primary goal is for folks to reject God and to worship him. Again, this verse, like several verses, references this wound of this Antichrist, which Satan is apparently making a big show of this recovery from this battle wound. And this is an attempt, again, to position this Antichrist as almost an intimidate, as a second Christ, and to undermine Christ, that somehow he has conquered death, which is absolutely false. The Antichrist has no such power over life and death. But he's showing the world that this Antichrist is invincible. And he continues that as well as the false prophet. Let's take a look at 13 and 14 as he continues with that goal in mind. And it, the second beast, performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. It's all a big show. Because of these signs, it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. Why? And it ordered them to set up an image, to create this image in honor of the Antichrist, the beast, who was wounded by the sword, yet lived. Again, Satan is so clever. So he'll have this second beast create this image. We don't know what it is, whether it's a statue, a monument, or more likely a device. So he'll oversee the creation of this image that will honor his boss, the Antichrist, which is an idol to be worshipped. And this likely is the same image that was used to desecrate the temple in Jerusalem. So they're, again, attempting to convince the people this Antichrist and Satan are powerful and invincible, and forcing them to focus on this idol. And they'll even attempt to further this claim of this power by the lie that starts in the next verse, where they're claiming that this beast has satanic power, satanic spirit that can create life. Just like God, that the breath of this creature can create life. Let's take a look starting in verse 15. The second beast was given power to give breath, spirit, to the image of the first beast, the Antichrist, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. So Satan is clever, is using this image to manipulate and to lie. So he's apparently created this statue or device that came to life and now can speak. But Paul warns us about these tricks that will happen in the last days. This man, meaning the Antichrist, will come to do the work of Satan with counterfeit powers and signs and miracles. Satan does not have the power to create life, but he does have the power, if we allow him, to manipulate and lie, and we believe these lies. So here Satan cleverly is using this device to intimidate and also to control and to do his will through this, quote, idol. So he's claiming this device can determine your loyalty to him, to Satan's government, or not. So this device somehow scans us, or the people, and decides whether you're loyal or not loyal. So if this device says that you're not loyal to him, you're subject to death. Either worship him or die. So how does this device read this? Likely via the mark of the beast, which is talked about in the next verse. Is potentially a tattooed barcode, or more likely a chip. It, the beast, also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, everyone, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads. Why? So that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark of the beast, which is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. Again, Satan knows that those loyal to God will not willingly agree to be branded as a follower and worshiper of the beast. Because this mark will serve as an ownership. It is literally a mark of ownership, just like you brand cattle. If you look at the Greek word here for this word mark, it means to etch, to scratch the name of the owner onto a stone, or even a person or an animal, a person meaning a slave. It is likely that many people will want the mark. It's a pride, a personal statement of their devotion to this, quote, leader. This mark testifies, I'm on the in crowd. I'm with the crowd that has this powerful leader. So they're going to proudly display visibly this mark on the forehead or the right hand. And what Scripture is telling us, without this mark, that you're not going to be able to buy food, buy gas, have access to all the services, banking, medicine, travel, or even talk on a phone. Today we know that cash is almost gone in our society. You'll be only able to do commerce with a approved chip, which is likely at some point is going to be implanted in us, much like our pets are today. Today, even, most devices already have these chips. Cell phones, cars, watches, even refrigerators and washing machines and light bulbs have chips that can be used for very good purposes, but in the wrong hands can be used for not good. So the verse is saying that without this satanical mark, you will be a social outcast, subject to persecution, prison, and even death. So Satan will have a database of all those that are not following him. This type of capacity was unimaginable in John's day, but we know today is very, very real. So it implies the time is indeed near. So what is the final verse in this chapter? What is Christ's counsel to those folks living during that tribulation period? Let's look at his wise counsel in verse 18 as we close the chapter. This calls for wisdom, meaning do not be deceived. Let the person who has insight calculate, meaning to be discerning, and recognize what? That the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. The number 6 all throughout Scripture is the number for a man. The number 7 is the number for God. That number is 666. So we have this number 666, man, man, man. Many have attempted to use numerology to calculate who is 666. Scholars were sure it was Nero. Many believed it was Hitler. Now this verse is telling us we're not to spend our time focused on trying to determine who is 666. Our focus should be on Christ. There is no doubt when the Antichrist comes and arrives, we will recognize him by his fruit and by his hatred for God and God's people. Our job is not to focus on the Antichrist. The job is to focus on Christ, meaning to follow him, to submit to him. Look at the beautiful promise in Scripture. Submit yourselves, follow God. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God, and resist being tempted. Resist the devil, and the devil will flee from you. That is a promise. Family, we also should remember that Satan's days are indeed numbered. He has a very specific timeline. God's victory is assured. And with that positive note, we'll close chapter 13. We'll pick it up next week, of course, with chapter 14, which is a beautiful chapter because we're going to be introduced to the victorious Christ. Until then, may God bless you. Bless you with good health and safety, and bless you and your family with grace and peace. Aloha.